This is the examination of the hidden human condition.
You're listening to the Hidden Killers Podcast.
This is the Hidden Killers Podcast with Tony Bruschi.
You know, doing this show every day, it takes a lot to shock me. It takes a lot to make me go, really? This person exists? But every once in a while, it happens. Aiden Fucci is one of those people that makes me go, really? But then you go, yeah, there's evil out there. There's twisted, evil people out there in the world, and it's not always adults. In fact, I look back on a lot of my life, some of the most twisted, bizarre behavior that seemed like pure evil, I honestly recall from childhood. And some of the people that I went to school with, where there wasn't that filter. And it wasn't going to happen either for some. And most of those people that I went to school with that I would have classified as nearly evil, yeah, they're either dead or in jail. I was calling it back then. But this kid, this is just beyond the scope of understanding to almost any of us. Aiden Fucci, of course, goes into the woods, lures a classmate out there, 13-year-old girl, and then brutally stabs her 114 times. Tristyn Bailey losing her life in such a senseless, crazy way. Why? Because Aiden wanted to feel what it felt like to murder someone. That's a monster. That's evil. That's someone who should not be on our planet, and I don't give a shit if he's a kid or not. Joining me to discuss this case and try and, connect some dots, Shavaun Scott. She's on our show quite frequently, a psychotherapist, author, one of my favorite people to talk to and dive into the psychological conversation. Shavaun, I don't know what to even make of this. I even hesitate to call him a human being for the way he acted after the fact and the way that he was even capable of doing this.
Yeah, this is a remarkable example of someone who is so cold, callous, unemotional, manipulative, rather fearless, to be 14 years old and to have an agenda to murder someone just for the experience of murdering them. And to lure this teenage girl, who I believe was only 13, into the woods in the middle of the night and then stab her 114 times. And then very coolly go back to your house, hide the evidence, and go on the next day just as if everything is normal. I mean, it's really a remarkably disturbed person. And I think this is a very good example of a child who's a full-blown psychopath at only 14, which we don't see a lot of, but it does happen.
Do we not see a lot of it because we don't diagnose kids with these sort of things at younger ages, and then they just grow up to be adults and do horrible things? I mean, should there be more looking into this sort of behavior? Obviously, it's not common that someone goes and stabs someone 114 times in the woods. But I mean, going to any high school, I challenge you not to find a handful of psychopaths.
Yeah.
Because there's some, I mean, the way that kids treat each other and the way that some seem to be just as cold and callous, maybe not going this extreme, but I could probably make a bet with somebody on who's going to end up in jail within the next 10 years and probably be pretty well on.
Yeah, that is true. And even though we don't see this degree of violence at this age, you've nailed it. You do see cruelty and kids that take delight in tormenting other kids, which, we all look back on our middle school years and high school often and just say, oh God, the worst time in my life. And it's because of that kind of behavior. So I do think we need to do a better job and support teachers in identifying kids who are on this kind of very dark path at young ages, because some of the behavior does start to show up in the preschool years. We always talk about it's a red flag flag for psychopathy if you see a kid who's torturing animals or hurting animals. But clinically, we even see kids who mutilate their stuffed animals, like intentionally take the toy, the teddy bear, rip the arms off, cut the head off. These are not normal behaviors in preschool children. And when you see something like this, that is kind of a red flag. Well, we need to be paying attention to how this kid is developing.
We seem incredibly ignorant on this. We so often just write this stuff off as, oh, they're being kids. They'll grow out of it. It's a phase. These aren't necessarily phases that people go through that are healthy individuals. There's not a lot of us who go through a let's, mutilate animals phase or things like that.
You're really looking at someone who has a brain difference. 50% of our personality is inherited, and a lot of this has to do with the genetics. With the psychopath, we think that 67% of these tendencies are inherited. Now, genes aren't destiny, and we can still help mold children and guide children and structure them and direct them. So it's not like you have a kid that's truly born a bad seed and that's it. There's nothing you can do. But there certainly are kids who are born different, and we need to take note of the way that they interact with other people. If they're particularly cold, callous, some of the other things we're concerned about, of course, we know about fire setting, torturing or killing small animals, stealing from other people, even when those people are your friends, is a red flag. There are kids that will steal from the store, and of course we want to stop that, or steal from people they don't like in school. We see that, but that's more in the range of normal childhood behavior. But when kids steal from people that are supposedly their friends, that's a real red flag.
Yeah.
If they try to dominate authority figures, and this may be the sixth grader who tries to dominate a teacher or frighten someone else, kids who try to attack police officers, which we do see sometimes, committing a crime alone. There's a lot of times when you'll have a group of kids, maybe adolescents, and they go out and they work each other up and they, commit some kind of crime, a theft or something like that. But if it's a kid who goes out alone to commit crimes, another red flag. And then people need to realize if they expose their kids to lots of really gruesome, gory violence, and if the child seems to be attracted to this and has a desire to watch more gruesome scenes or events, particularly if they want to watch someone die or cause someone to die, if they even talk about that or write stories about that, these are all things that we do need to get a kid some help. I think parents have to realize that kids are all different. And if they see these signs with a kid, they may have a child that's going to need some intervention, but also they need in the home a lot of structure and to not be left to their own devices, and always come in the angle of helping them have compassion for other people and connect with other people and learn to put the brakes on some of these bad impulses. Because a normal kid, they may not need that much structure. They may just innately be doing most of the right things most of the time. But there are kids who just don't. And if we can catch it early, I don't know what Aiden Fucci was like as a 6 or 7 year old, but my guess is he's been different all along. And that doesn't mean he didn't have a good home, but it may have meant that the parents just really didn't understand how different he was, and that this kid did need more guidance than he got.
And I completely agree with you. And in a wonderful, perfect world, that would be a wonderful way to kind of correct some behavior. The issue that I would have with all this is the teacher's hands are completely tied. I mean, they can barely correct anything. I mean, they're in times have difficulty just telling the kid they're wrong on their math equation without, we're going to hurt the child's feelings and tell them that they're incorrect. So if we can't even break that barrier, I don't know how we're going to allow teachers to, intervene on a deeper level like this. And quite often, I know it's not every single case, but to then rely on the parents of a child like this, that's probably half the reason they're acting the way they are to begin with, because of the conditioning that they had at home. So those parents are likely in no way qualified to try and steer this kid in the right direction. The parents are probably just as troubled. So when you have these two safety nets, if you will, that do not work, are not even enabled to work or exist, what does a kid like this do? I mean, there certainly needs to be some kind of intervention, but if the parents are basically failing at it, the school's not allowed to do much of anything. We just kind of seem to have to be victims of these people until they, do their crime and then are eventually hauled away from society. But there are so many signs, like you said, of these things out there, but we do nothing, or we don't have any sort of sensible system to try and prevent or correct these people or keep them at bay. Because with some of these kids, I can imagine with this kid, there was no fixing him. I don't see where there's somebody doing therapy with him or parents acting this way or teachers intervening. You just have some evil people sometimes, and it does show up in childhood. But nobody, number one, the parents don't want to admit if there's something wrong. So even if this kid was weird or different or whatever for many years, they're going to look at it, well, it's our little angel who sits in between us at the movie theater and sips on his icy, I believe was one of the statements that they made. I mean, what do you do? I mean, the parents I found amusing almost, where they were sitting in the initial interrogation of their son, and there's video, and the kid's sitting there just defiant as hell. And, this is really serious, Aiden. This is right. Bad. This is bad. I mean, if your son just stabbed a girl 114 times, I think it deserves a little more than just, this is bad, buddy. It's like, I mean, I'm not an abusive person. I never struck anybody in my life, but I think if my son did that, I would be really hard to hold back. Something like that. Of like, how dare you sit here and act like this? That's my soapbox. But what can we do?
And they did. I thought they had a quality of really being perplexed. Like they just did not know what to do. Yeah. But they certainly didn't have the kind of reaction that I would have had, which would have been much more alarmed. And the thing that was so striking about Aiden in that video was his incredible callousness. Yeah. Just incredible. And the back of the police car video where he had been arrested, and he's basically laughing and making jokes. Yeah. This is really unusual behavior. I mean, of course, the stabbing someone 114 times is unusual behavior, but everything about it is off. And yes, what would we do with a kid like that? Ideally, residential treatment, where you have a staff of people 24/7 who are highly trained in managing kids with extreme behavior. And had he been placed in something like that, he might have always been a difficult person and a person that we would have to keep an eye on, but he might have been better managed and taught that he had to keep the brakes on, and clearly this is a person at this point who doesn't feel like he has to follow the rules that the rest of us follow.
But I mean, as a parent, if you're seeing these sort of behaviors, a complete lack of empathy, almost finding joy in tragedy, I mean, other than waiting for them to do something horrible and then you can commit them in some way, shape, or form. Yeah. I know there's a lot of parents out there who are like that. They're like, look, my other kids are great. This one's a bad apple. Right. I don't even like them. They're going to grow up and get 18 and probably go end up in jail, and I'm really not going to have anything to do with them. But earlier on, sometimes the parents and the rest of the family are just sitting ducks with these monsters in their home, and they can't really do a whole lot, or can they? I guess is my question.
Yeah, if somebody has a kid that they're worried about and they're seeing these kind of antisocial tendencies or violent tendencies, fearless tendencies, the consequences don't apply to me kind of tendencies, I would say, a good place to start, we want to get kids in therapy, but not all therapists are specialized in working with kids like this. So I think I would personally call my local probation department and ask for some referrals. for a therapist that they know can work with difficult kids, because probation officers, they have to, work with clinicians all the time in the community. And I think you would get a good referral that way. In some communities, there are schools through the probation department once kids begin violating the rights of others. And if we can get a kid channeled into the right resources, there may actually be a turnaround to some degree.
That was kind of going to be my next question with somebody like this. And certainly there are many people who can get treatment and see some sort of a turnaround. But when you have something like this, is there always a turnaround, or are some people just broken?
Yeah, I think for Aiden Fucci, I think he's broken. And I don't see him ever being safe to walk among the rest of us. And certainly it's a tragedy when you have to have a 14-year-old incarcerated for probably the duration of their lives. But I don't know that there's a good alternative for a kid like that.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking. With something like this, what about the parents? Because people do look back on that and go, well, shouldn't they be held responsible in some way, shape, or form? What's your thoughts on that as far as their culpability for their son acting out in such an extreme way? I'm sure mom and dad weren't sitting there going, hey, go stab the cheerleader. Right. But at the same point, do we know if there's any investigation going into this family as to, this didn't just happen in a vacuum? I'm thinking there may be some reason why this kid acts out in certain ways, or should there be no examination of that for the well-being, of the other kids that they have?
Yeah, I think everybody always has to examine what was the environment here. And from the little bit I know, they appeared to be a middle-class family. There were divorced parents, but both parents had remarried, and the child apparently did fairly well in both homes. So nothing that it's not like they had a bunch of weapons around the house that he had free access to or anything like that. I think that's the case where we're going to see with all these mass shootings, when the parents have supplied the child with the gun. I think we're going to be seeing, we're seeing parents prosecuted in those cases. So I don't know that there will be anything extreme that comes out in this case. And I don't know that the parents can be held legally responsible. But certainly we all, if we bring a kid into the world, we have a moral responsibility to raise a person who doesn't go out and cause harm in the world. And so I think it's a heavy load being a parent. That.
Sure,
it's a big responsibility. And I think that the home is going to be looked at pretty closely, and what is going on with the other kids in the home.
Do you see that being any sort of influence? I mean, it's the same. I would say it's almost the same of, we have very strict penalties. This state has the death penalty or this or that. And we don't really see it influencing crime one way or the other in terms of the heinous things that people will do. If there is more culpability for parents as a standard in things like this, do you see that improving parenting? Do you see any of that actually changing the behavior or having less children acting out in extreme ways? Or is this, it should do what it's going to do, and that's keeping people accountable, but will it actually make an impact on the number of tragedies that we see?
Yeah, we can only speculate. I think the test is going to be with the parents that supplied the gun. I believe it was in Michigan, that supplied the gun to the kid that was the school shooter there, and they are in the process of being tried. So I think we don't know at this point, because we haven't really gone that way as a society in holding parents accountable. The Murdaugh case being another one, that, the boat accident, if parents are giving their kids access to boats or cars and the kids are drinking and the parents are aware of this behavior and drink with them, and this is all validated in the home, maybe over time, if we start seeing these cases where parents are held accountable for the actions of their minor children, we may start to see people pay a bit more attention, at least some people.
This is an examination of the hidden human condition.
This is the Hidden Killers Podcast.
The Hidden Killers Podcast.
With Tony Bruschi.
Super fascinating conversation. Shavaun, as always, thank you so much for being on the program and giving us your insight. My name's Tony Bruschi. Press subscribe wherever you download podcasts so you don't miss any of our discussions and coverage of the cases that we are following for you right here. Giving it an ad-free experience through Apple Podcasts. Stay with us.